There we go.
It works. Yeah. The man, DAOMOVE. Bjarte, how are you, man?
I'm pretty good. It's been a trying couple since we had our baby, but it's good.
Yeah, congratulations again.
Thanks, man.
How do you feel like your training has changed since another little human came in the world?
What training?
Yeah, what sleep,
Yeah,
what training?
yeah, exactly. There hasn't been much room for it's like a structured training practice. It's more been kind of just finding in between where I'm just kind of exploring on my own, uh, without really a strong container around it, or just playing around.
So like your usual practice, huh?
Basically,
Maybe some
business as usual.
infant teacups, the usual. So
Yeah.
for people who aren't familiar with you, could you go into your like superhero origin story, the Kill Bill training with a master, a Tai Chi master? I'd love to hear about that.
Mm. Um, yeah, there is quite a story, I guess, of how DAOMOVE came into being and how it all transpired. Um, I guess to sum it up, it's I started practicing Tai Chi at around 19, when I was 19, and both of my parents are Tai Chi teachers. So I was kind of brought up in a family where that culture was really at the center of what we were kind of immersed in. And then when I was around 22 or 23, I ended up going. So I moved to China initially just for half a year. I went to Beijing to study Mandarin. And yeah, I went to the sports university to practice Tai Chi there. And when I arrived there, I really discovered that what they were teaching at the sports university at Beijing was not what I was really looking for. It was like more the surface. It was kind of scratching the surface of what Tai Chi really was. The Tai Chi dance more than kind of the internal work. Is my internet okay here?
I'm hearing you okay.
Okay, good. Yeah, and then I eventually ended up. I had I had a really good Tai Chi master later in Beijing who taught me a lot about the internal side of it and how to really move my qi, my energy, basically, and how to direct my awareness in a way to get with that internal world. And what happened after that, I guess, is the most, at least from the outside, more impressive part of my story, which was I traveled, I went to the Wudang Mountains. So the Wudang Mountains is like a Taoist mountain range in China that's been inhabited by Taoists for at least 1500 years and has a culture of martial arts. China, they often think of it as you have Shaolin in the north, and then you have the Wudang in the south. And basically the difference between them is like Wudang is like a really soft internal martial art, and the Shaolin is a little more external and hard. And yeah, when I arrived there in the Wudang Mountains, I met Master Zhong, who was the headmaster of the school. And he really didn't take much of an interest in any of the foreigners who were training there. So there was a small group of foreigners training there. So he would come around to our class and like watch us doing kicks and basic training. And he would often just on the side of the courtyard at the temple, and he would just look at us for minutes, and then he would kind of shake his head and just walk off, grumbling. And I had a few interviews with him through my first half year there, and they were always like uncomfortable. Like he was a really severe man, or he is a really severe man. Like a lot of fire, like a lot of strength, and but also not a very pleasing will.
So it's like the prototypical martial arts master at the top of the hill, the mountain, right?
Indeed, very much prototypical or stereotypical Chinese master in many movies. And I stayed there for half a year. That was my initial intention. And at the end of that time, I was like, I've got to stay here longer. I'm hardly scratching the surface of what this is really about. So I ended up extending for another 4 months. And Master Zhong gradually started taking more interest in me because I spoke Mandarin relatively fluently, and because of my lineage, and I spent a lot of time in internal martial arts. I'm very dedicated to my training when I was there. More dedicated to that than anything I've ever been in my life, I think. Because previous to that, I was always like at school, I never did any work, and I kind of tried escaping my commitments wherever I could. And I thought that was just because I was a kind of a shitty student. But when I discovered martial arts and that lineage there, I really found something I could give myself. And yeah, that's when I ended up there. And at the end of those 10 months, I went to his house over there, which was like a huge deal. I was terrified. Yeah, I sat in his little tea house, and he poured me a cup of tea, which I was like drinking with trembling hands from these tiny little teacups. And and at the end of this session, he kind of just asked me, "Well, what's your Chinese name? Or how do you spell it? Which Chinese characters do you use?" Oh, well, it's just Bjarte. My name is Bjarte, so it's just a Chinese transliteration of my Norwegian name. So I was like, I don't really like my name because it like literally translated it can mean something like to Asia great or something. So it's not a really great name to have when you're in China. So I asked him, oh, maybe you would be willing to give me a new name. And when I said that, he literally just closed his eyes, stayed silent for like a minute or two. And I was just kind of nervously waiting for whatever would come next. And as he said, your new name will be Ling Yuan. And I've decided to offer you to become my disciple as the first Westerner ever. And I was just kind of stunned. I was like, I don't even know what that means. What does that? And I guess I was silent for a while. So he said, like, do you accept? He repeated that after the first time. And I just kind of said, yes, I accept, having no idea what
You
I
chose
was
the red
really
pill.
accepting.
Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, that led me on down the rabbit hole, so to speak, into out of the matrix, or whatever metaphor you want to use for it. So I left back to Norway for a short while, back with commitment, and really went through hell. It was like the next level of training, and went through a lot of humbling experience, a lot of very deeply challenging experiences, a lot of loneliness and isolation, and extremely hard training, like to 10 hours a day of training. And
So it's like training with Ido Portal.
yeah, I guess you could say that. Slightly different. Although I guess has a reputation for being pretty severe too. Yeah, man, that time was yeah, it's weird thinking that was like part of my life, and I went through all of that. Obviously, there's like tons of stories to uncover in the middle of all of that. Like, I was living in his house with him for 3 months or something in the beginning, that was probably the hardest part of it. Like he would burst into my room after all the training had ended and say like, "Get out there and like punch out candles for 1 hour." Like, he would have this rack where there were like candles all set up, and I'd have to be like trying to blow them out with the air pressure from my fists.
Yes.
Yes. Kind of fun, but after an hour of doing that, like the pain I was experiencing in my shoulders was unbelievable. Which in a way taught me something, because I was like, with all of this pain, I've got to keep going, and I had to find a way to punch without it.
So I'd like to
yeah.
pick apart the physical aspect of this. So you said before that on the surface of the practice, you saw it was kind of a choreographed, aesthetic, external show of dance performance. And then you went into the internal. But it seems like, tapping into these internal realms was done through this like physical hardship and pushing yourself. So can you explain like the difference between the external physical practice and the internal growth you were having?
I didn't quite catch the last part of what you said. It seems to be breaking up.
Oh, sorry. Could you explain the kind of external physical portion of your training and how it tied into the internal practice?
Well, yeah, they kind of go hand in hand. Like they're not separate things. So the external part of it was like it could take the shape of just basics training, like doing 1,500 kicks in half an hour, for example, like, which is really intense to do. Like, it's basically one kick for half an hour. and just over a period of time kind of transforms you in a way, and definitely forces you to come up with, like, to really dig deep for resources in yourself. So internally, in that way, the more kind of direct internal training I did was more around standing meditation. Like, I would do standing meditation maybe an hour every day.
Jeez.
Which is pretty hard, and it's like really going into the structure of your body and softening and like encountering what's there and releasing into it. So it's sort of a meeting of oneself, and that softening would then again inform how I proceeded with my more general training. So yeah, it's a hard one to answer because they both kind of feed into each other, and the ways they do that, I guess, are in the polarities of hard and soft. So I would consider the internal training is more on the softening side of it, although you definitely need to have appropriate hardness, so to speak. But also, the external training was like way more just on the gross body, like training your muscles, like making your body more flexible, stretching. And the internal was meeting my mind and transforming the intent with which I would perform something. So I guess that is a big difference, like between the external and the internal, as far as the martial arts context is concerned, at least. Like,
yeah,
the difference
you can never truly separate.
No, I wouldn't say you can really truly separate them. Although, if you go into the internal world, you can see masters who have really achieved high levels of internal power. Almost always explored external practices also, like more external practices, like really challenging their bodies, strengthening their bodies. But if you want to go deep into the internal, you've really got to commit to it, because that's like a surrendering of will, in a way, of your will, or of your desire to conquer someone. It's like you're surrendering to the principles of the internal, and then that will generate the force. So I can see like there's two kind of slightly different ways of internal. Like, one is internal martial arts, which is its own context, and internal as like going on for me emotionally and mentally and spiritually in this. So I don't want to get them too mixed up, but in all mental, spiritual realm, yeah, it really broke me down to rock bottom, and it made me feel parts of myself I really didn't want to feel. And then from there, it kind of, I had the possibility to build myself up again. Although I definitely unnecessarily also, I can feel that, like, in the years following that time, I spent loads of time just addressing like pain, feelings of pain and isolation, and physical trauma, as well as emotional, that I threw there, like grief that had to be released.
Sounds like a very psychedelic experience. cycle
Yeah.
he went through. Yeah, an hour standing practice, you did that daily. That is sounds very difficult, just from that internal perspective. So that's impressive. So what did you feel like how did your capacity as far as I mean, on the physical level and the internal level change after that training? What do you feel like you have available to you now that you've kept?
Yeah, good question. Because my practice has transformed a lot since those days. What I gained in practice was a really strong awareness of my body, like an ability to move my body in a very subtle way, which is something I really highly value. It's like with how much accuracy I can command this, like my body, how subtly I can explore my physically. That's something I'm really glad I developed, and that stayed with me also. Like my body will always carry the residue of that, of something that I spent years building into. And also, it definitely influenced me deeply. My encounter with Taoism. That really informed the way I deliver my practice now, which is based on non-action and like basically what is a proper way to be in the world, or what is the best way in the world, which is what all religions have really been trying to answer or give guidelines to. And I've been exploring how to how to implement that and how to bring that out in myself, but also in the people I work with, and especially using this principle of non-action that I interpret as like the full meeting of reality as it is, not holding back, not pulling away from it or over-inserting myself into.
Mm. So would you
Yeah.
say during your training, during these hard physical activities you had to do that kind of pushed your boundaries, and also the more stillness internal training, both of them forced you to confront the present moment, and brought you into that awareness? Was that kind of one of the goals of this training?
Am I changing my networks yet? Because you are breaking
Okay.
up a lot. Hopefully that. Could you repeat?
Uh-oh. We'll wait till Bjarte switches his internet. This is good stuff. If anybody has questions in the chat, feel free to type them. Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just asking, so these methods of training you did, where you were pushing the boundaries of your physical capacity and limits, and also on the stillness and internal practice, really going deep. Do you feel like one of the reasons for doing that, or one of the things you gained, was it forced you to confront, I guess, the present moment, and come fully into that awareness?
Yeah. Well, it all fed into it ultimately. A really huge process of reintegration into society when I came back from the mountains. Like just encountering Western society again after being on top of a mountain for 3 years was intense, right? I was like forced to deal with emails and like marketing myself as a teacher and dealing with how to like accounts in order. And after just basically having a schedule of training, eating, sleeping for years, that was a huge transition. And also the burden that I was carrying, transmitting this back to people, back how to transmit what I was doing, and like this role that I'm of the kung fu master from the mountain was an intention also. Like it basically led me into a really deep depression when I came back. And it wasn't until after about a year that I kind of an intolerable, yes, where I just, like the bottom fell out and I just had no energy and I'd basically given up, that I really found like the reason for my depression, and it was holding on to this persona that I'd cultivated through my time there, or like this idea of what I was going to do and what I was going to bring it, and that I held to do it in the persona kung fu master from Wudang Mountains. And once I had that realization, it kind of blew me out of myself. Like I just experienced awareness purely without any filter, without any attachment to this identity that I was carrying. And that was pretty shocking, but also really liberating. Like it liberated carrying that crazy burden of like all of the ideas I had that I'd created myself, but I also had from Master Zhong. So it really, that was a really beautiful and painful moment that transformed the way I related to everything in my life. Like I broke all ties I had because I was like, well, this is, what am I doing? I'm living someone else's life, basically. It's my experience. And in China really led up to that point, because while I was cultivating the letting go of my tension, I was learning about spirituality. I was also building an ego, or like a persona that was built around this idea of a Kung Fu master coming back from the Wudang Mountains. So it was really weird process that I had to kind of really let go of that before I could start to find, well, what do I really want to do then? Like I'm doing all these things based on what I think I should be doing and what other people said I should be doing, and I for me. I'm like, well, what's really mine? What is my longing, my genuine desire to create something in this world? And what is actually just an idea that's been implanted in me and that I've kind of rolled with?
So I'm curious to
And
know,
yeah.
so once you shed this this ego and this identity that you know is just a mask. Is there a way that you could still use it knowing that it's just a mask and it's not you? Let's say for social or marketing or business, like can it still be used but not having ownership over you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, how I use that identity to serve me rather than to control me, essentially. Yeah, there's definitely feels like that's possible, and I think that's still part of my process of integration. And like I'm trying to figure that out. Like, well, what feels good? Like, what's the way of doing this? Like right now, I'm doing something that doesn't look superficially anything like what I was doing before. Like I'm navigating interpersonal relationships with groups of people. Like this morning, I was facilitating a workshop for Adidas's e-commerce team in Europe, and kind of helping them into their bodies and like how to become more transparent and vulnerable in interpersonal connections. Officially, it doesn't really look anything like what I was doing in the mountains, but essentially it feels like way closer to the root of it for me. Because I'm getting, like, for me at least, I'm like, well, what is the thing that we call reality? Like this thing we're experiencing, like right here, this experience of reality where we seem to be in this physical body that we're all inhabiting, and like, well, are we here? It's like, it's the question everyone is asking. And like, it's hard to find a good answer for that, other than, well, just because, like, to experience it.
Yeah.
Like for experience itself. And yeah, I totally lost my thread of thought.
Well, that brings me into another
Yeah, yeah.
question. So I've read books about Taoism and these things, and I'm wondering, do you see a difference between like the Taoist practice and that you've lived and the Taoist philosophy, maybe the Western version that I'm used to? Can you define your viewpoint on that?
The difference between the Taoist practice, could you just repeat that?
Yeah, like the traditional Taoist practice,
Mm-hmm.
and the kind of Taoist philosophy that
The
we're fed
Western
in the Western
interpretation
culture.
of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting question because, well, what is Taoism? Like, if you read the first line of the Tao Te Ching, it will say, like the classical text that's been around for 2,500 years, it will say, the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal. So essentially, the Tao that you on or you label in any way, it ceases to really be Tao. So Tao is this nameless thing which is all-encompassing and undefinable. So even in that sense, like even the traditional Taoist practices are kind of also aiming at, but never succeeding fully completely, Taoism. or Dao, because to merge with the Dao is like relinquishing your identity. But there's definitely a difference. Well, I guess the main difference I see, although I don't see a lot of Westerners like really engaging with Taoism, it seems to be more popular with Buddhism and yoga and those types of philosophies. But I guess the main difference is yeah, you know, I really thought I would have a good answer for this, and I felt a bit of pressure to come up with a good answer. So I'm just catching myself, yeah, like, well,
I
what
think
can I really
your
say
first
about
answer,
this?
you know, the Tao that can be spoken is not the Tao. So, I mean, that's kind of perfect. We could leave it there.
I don't really have a lot to say about that, if I'm honest. I think like there's, yeah, I think we're all full of shit. Like as soon as we claim that something is superior or better,
Or we try to
like
explain it, right?
yeah, yeah. Like I guess for many, my practice, the practice I've come up with is like a Western bastardization of traditional Taoism. Could be could be viewed as that.
And that's what I was going to ask, because in your practice, you are bringing people into awareness, bringing people into the moment, into embodiment. And so you're trying to achieve this for, I'm guessing, anyone, you know, a regular person, not someone who has to go train for 3 years in the mountains. So do you think, have you found a way that this is easily accessible to everyone, and there's no, you know, physical limit to barrier of entry?
I actually did not pick up much of what you just said. It's terribly annoying that it's cutting out like this, but I don't
That's
know.
okay. You probably could have heard everything I said and still not have. I probably didn't say it right, so I'm gonna rephrase this. So um, during your practice, what you're teaching in these workshops seems to be getting people into the present awareness, into their bodies. Um, and it looks like everyone can access this. Like there's no barrier to entry
Mhm.
because of a physical limitation or skill
No.
level, correct? So how have you found to do this without, you know, saying too much specifics?
Yeah. Uh, I can definitely say something about that because like there's no one that has ownership of that. Like like we all have ownership of our experience, and we access it. Like we all are it. There's no way of not being really. Of course, like have our identities and egos and our various levels of identification with that, and that is born out of our and biologically, socially, and well, what I can say about how to do that, at least what I've seen so far, is simply just stopping and noticing, like, well, what is it like to be me right now? Like, what's going on in my experience? Once I just stop, and I'm not going to try and change anything. I'm not going to try to escape it or try to do something. I'm just gonna slow down for a second and like, well, what's it like? What's moving in me? And not to deny that experience at all. So once we can make space for that, which is what a lot of practices do through meditation, once we can make space for that interpersonally, like, and in this connection now, what's it like to be us sitting right here, humans, like half pretend I know what I'm talking about, and also knowing that I don't.
It's fucking beautiful,
And
is what it
is. Yeah, it is. And it's like, but actually, it's such a relief to let go of like having to know. And once I kind of go past that point of resistance and that, like, oh shit, I've got to hold on to something. Don't I have to hold on? Otherwise, like, what's going to happen? I'm going to go. Like, that's the fear that lies at the root of it all. It seems like that fear of not existing or annihilation that will cease to matter or will cease to be important, that will be forgotten. And I guess that's what we meet, and we have to meet that to get to that, which is, yeah, which is.
Which is, yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, I think it kind of touches on what you said in the beginning, the performance, the dance versus the kind of deeper experience. And what I like is the fact that there is no skill or thing that you have to teach to get there. You know, the path you have to take, it's available with everything, right? Sitting here, brushing your teeth, walking, insert any exercise, they're all tools to experience, to the present moment. It's almost like everything's available to us, which you could confront and then be like, oh shit, well then how do I take ownership over this as a teacher? Like what's the method I teach? When it's really everywhere around us, everything. So I would love to come to one of your workshops, and I'm excited that you're going to give us a small taste in OMU. So could you talk about not exactly what you're going to present in OMU, but what you hope people will get out of it?
Yeah, what I hope people will get out of what I'm presenting in OMU.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in what I'll be presenting in OMU, I guess I'll be into the structure. Like it will be more around structural, like discovering the body and cultivating sensitivity. And part of it will be like, well, just giving tools for how to for more of their embodied experience in movement. And what I get out of it is just, yeah, more into their body, like more awareness of how their body moves, what it's like to walk, and like the hundreds and thousands of things that are happening that we're mostly just not conscious of. So yeah, we won't. I doubt we're going into kind of deep spiritual work there, but it will be more on the physical plane. Like, well, we're in this fleshy vehicle with bones and sinews, and like, well, what can we do with it? It's also a really interesting question and a dimension to explore. Although that's not really at the heart of my work. More, it's also something I'm passionate. Like, really glad I developed through those years of dedicated training. So yeah, more sensitivity, greater enjoyment, and some new tools for how to explore their own movement practice.
Could this be categorized under the Tai Chi practice?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it will be based on Tai Chi, and there'll also be some elements of Ba Gua, like another internal martial art, which is like it's full of spirals and there's like loads of stuff going on.
Oh yeah.
It's really a lot of fun. It's way more fun than Tai Chi. It's so dynamic, and it's like people talk about it as like the art of the swimming dragons. It's like you're swimming, which I think makes it freaking beautiful. And it's one of those practices I loved doing, although like the basics of it were grueling. Like basically just walking in circles for hours on end. Like that's how you train, like the foundation of it, because it's circle walking. And then there's all of these body movements that go along with it. A very specific way of shifting the weight, a very specific way of being in movement and like really flowing. So you're not really, yeah, you just want to get smooth. And the weight shift is like instantaneous from foot to foot, not in Tai Chi where it's really slowly transitioning from foot to foot. Like instantaneous, yeah, it's something we'll go more into in the videos. But it's a fascinating art, and something as simple as walking carries so much nuance, depth to be explored, and I think is a really neglected part of practice. Like how to, like what are we actually doing when we're walking? So, like normally you don't think about like, wow, there are all these different ways I could shift my weight.
Mm. So personally, in your day-to-day, how much awareness do you try to bring into your actions and your schedule? Like, have you ever, this is something that I would like to accomplish one day, is just following the breath for a whole day. And I've never I never got close. It seems impossible. But like the fact of just creating more time in the day, more awareness throughout the day. Like I said, which is kind of, it's irrelevant what you're doing because it could be with anything, right? Are you mindful of this?
Yeah, or I try to be, and I fail, and then I try again. So I think a real reason we fail, a big reason we fail is because we're constantly navigating interpersonal relationships. And solitary meditation doesn't really give us good tools for how to deal with those. It gives us good tools for how to deal with ourselves. Like, oh, well, what happens if I just notice myself? But when we get into connection with someone else, that can form a really strong foundation. But if we're not conscious of how we're relating, then we're just going to really get pushed out of our centers really often. So what for me was like, well, all of those moments are actually moments you can have a deeper awareness and like create more connection. And I think the ultimate question is like, well, what wants to happen right now? Like if I really meet this moment fully, what wants to happen? And if I'm unable to meet the moment fully, or I'm unwilling to do that which my being is calling for, then I'm not going to succeed in being present. I'm going to be pushing reality away, or that which wants through me away. So that's a big part of it, I think, is getting more competent at navigating interpersonal relationships. Although navigating ourselves is a really big part of it, obviously, also.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons. Oh, I'm sorry. Continue.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, when you said that, I automatically thought that's why I love float tanks so much, is because it just shuts out the outside world and I don't have to deal with the noise or any other, stimulus coming in. I could just breathe pretty much. And that is a crutch in a way.
Yeah, well, like the metaphor that comes to mind is like, well, it's training wheels for your ability to stay present, right? So we need to practice in some place because the world is really confusing and messy and unpredictable. So, like, how are we going to train that in the middle of a busy city when we can't even think straight? Like, we've got to find that stillness first, that clarity of mind. And yeah, I guess a float tank is a really good place to do that because it just shuts out all of or a lot of the senses. So there's stimuli, so you're kind of left with yourself in a more easy to manage state. Yeah. So I guess it's like when I'm on top of a mountain, it's like, well, it's easy to meditate and be spiritual on top of a mountain away from civilization when all of your needs are met and taken care of. When you're in reality, like dealing with really core issues of like how to feed yourself and like all of these things we're forced to deal with as humans, like then it's way harder. It's way fucking harder. We've got to like take care of ourselves, maybe our children, and yeah.
The Buddha didn't, He said peace to his kids. Yeah. He's like, I got to get enlightened. He had his priorities in order.
Yeah, that's the secret to it.
Well, I mean, in a sense, there's a thread that you do have to take care of yourself first before you could really help give that to others. Or not. Maybe that's just a bullshit line. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. It seems that's the case, though. Like, that's what they advise in airplanes, right? Put on your own oxygen mask first before helping others. You're pretty useless to others if you're unconscious. So I guess that's a pretty good rule. I'm sure there are many exceptions to it. I guess as far as rules go, it's a good one. Like, take care of yourself first. Make sure that you are able to function. Because, like, well, if you have trouble, like, you're going to be very useless to them if you're not in a good place. Of course, there's like a balance. Like, what's the balance there?
Yeah.
Because there's no. Oh well, my kid really needs dinner, but like I've got to have my 2-hour float tank ritual, so I'm gonna go spend my time there, and they'll just be hungry in the meantime. Like, there's seems to be some line somewhere where we've got to feel ourselves, I guess, where we want to put what's the level of self-care we need.
Yeah, it's such a
Maybe
tricky.
it's all bullshit, as you said.
Yeah, that line is tricky. I mean, I've heard like
Yeah.
there's a lot of new parents who use the family as an excuse not to follow their dream or, go after their passion because it's like I got kids, and then that kind of defeatist victim mentality feeds into the kids, and they grow up with that, so but you do have to take care of them, so it's like, yeah, how do you navigate that space? Who knows?
Yeah, what comes to mind is something like something Jim Carrey actually, or a lesson he learned from his father. His father apparently sacrificed doing what to get like a safe, steady job so he could care for his children. And then at some point he got fired and he got laid off, and then they really struggled. So Jim Carrey's, well, do what you want, because you can also fail at what you don't want to do. So I'll go for what you really deeply want.
Great advice. Yeah.
Mm.
All right, we got 1 minute left on this chat. So I'm going to close it down and reopen it up, and then we'll finish up. Sound good?
Cool.
All right, back on.
Yeah.
One more thing I wanted to tease out. So watching your videos, I mean, the expression that you're able to convey through movement, through your physical practices, it's beautiful to watch. You and also John Yoon, two people I love watching the art form of it. But it's interesting. I heard you say, not that you express yourself, but you let it express through you. And I'm sure we could define it as many things through many different lenses. But could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. About letting it express through you rather than expressing something. It's really hard to put into words what that is, but I'll give it a shot. Well, what I discovered for myself was if I let go and I step out of my own way and I just get really curious about what wants to happen, like on a physical level, like what am I feeling moving in me? Because there seems to be all the movement happening, actually. if we just listen closely. It's like now, right now, even now, like what's moving and what happens through me, and how much space can I make for that? And I think a key thing with that is I never know. I can never control what comes out then. So I have no power over what is expressed if I'm really surrendering through me. Whether that be kind of my own emotions that are showing themselves, or it's like my connection to going on more broadly in the space. If it's a connection to you, for example, as I'm feeling it, like how is it impacting me? So if I'm close, what moves through me, it's a surrendering of wanting to appear in a certain way, or even having any ownership over what's expressed. It's like becoming a vessel, whatever you want to call it, or something else, like, which easily sounds a bit pompous when I say it, but it's not really.
From that makes sense. And I'm also wondering if we look at the lens through it being maybe the deep, the elephant instead of the rider, which would be a rational prefrontal cortex, the I, or that subconscious. Could this also be an expression of I guess trauma or something that we were suppressing,
Sure.
or the shadow self in a sense? Is this also could be used as a method to really just let all that come to the surface?
Yeah, sure. And that's almost always where it leads. At least at first, it's like, well, if I surrender how I want to appear to the world, then I just get really close to what's already there, and that's almost always the case for human beings, is deep hurt and grief over that was not the way we wanted it to be or needed it to be. Like we're all as children, we're all really in need of this uh, unconditional acceptance and love, but very few of us get it. We all lack in some way, some more. So it's definitely a way of getting. And I surprised myself many times when I went into those spaces. What came out of me? Like I had no idea there was so much there. It seems to be when I lead workshops in this, that deep dives, this is what people meet themselves, whether it's like the resistance. As soon as we go there, it's like, well, what am I going to do then? Like, this is what I've been doing my whole life, is trying to appear this way. Although that's not necessarily a conscious process. But when we let go of those rules that dictate how we think we should be behaving and what we think should happen and how we think, once we let go of that, there's, I don't know if you hear that in the background, so my baby crying.
Oh, yeah. If you have to leave early.
No, she's got it handled. But yeah, there's we're confronted with all of the ways we're not doing that presently, and that shows itself through the body in a variety of ways. It could be that you just freeze, that you totally freeze. You're like, oh fuck, I I don't know what to do when I'm just gonna freeze because it's so scary. Or maybe you'll want to run away, or you'll want to in some way, or blame me for not telling you what to do, which also happens. Like, well, what are you doing? You're not telling me what to do. You're just like doing nothing basically. You're just speaking about like get close to yourself. Well, I could have done that at home, but we don't do that very often. But it seems always some unique expression of that hurt. And sometimes there's a lot of resistance to being with it. Other times there's not that much resistance to being with it. And it's always a fascinating discovery with everyone I work with, I think. Just the simple fact of wanting to get close to what it's like to be can lead to so much. So it's not really a desire to change them it's coming from, and that seems to be key, that it's like really getting to what it's like to be you right now. And if there's enough trust for you to show it to me, because that's undoubtedly one of the most vulnerable things to have, like when we can really get close to who we are, to really truly share that with someone.
Yeah, that's I'm so glad you're doing that work, and it sounds like you're passionate about that through movement. And I think that's one of the uses of physical practice and movement that is so important, and that's underutilized in a sense, is accessing these states of the nervous system. I mean, I heard you mention like freeze, flight, fight, like going through these because you know, this is kind of where that trauma is held, and to access that through movement, which is very natural, and to, you know, not control it or not go for a certain outcome, but actually experience it and face it. And I think that combined with the physical practice is a tool to get in touch and dive deep in. So I know my view of movement has changed a lot recently. Do you think, I know we talked a little bit about the choreographed, the skills portion of movement, which is helpful. I mean, it increases options and freedom. But what you are accessing or experiencing through these tools, you don't see that talked about much in the physical practice realm. And honestly, one of the only mainstream practices I think that tapped into that was CrossFit. You know, as much as we want to make fun of it, they were going to some deep places during some of these workouts, especially in the group setting. So yeah, I just want to know your view of why move, of what is the why or intention behind the movement practice? Because I think a lot of people, it is just to get the skills, which is okay. But I think you're going beyond this, not on the outside level, I guess you could say, but as far as the intention behind it, how do you view movement as a tool in a practice?
Yeah. It's an interesting question, like the why. Um, well, I have my why, I guess, because I enjoy it. Um, Part of it is because I like maintaining my physique. I like having the freedom to move, but also my body looking a certain way, and I think that's like something that's also a bit demonized, or it's been made wrong. Like, well, you shouldn't be doing it for those reasons to appear aesthetically beautiful, but that appeals to us for a reason. Like, well, why do we find something beautiful? It's because it looks healthy and it looks like it's capable of doing what it's meant to be doing. Like our body is meant to be functional, or like that's what it evolved for. So yeah, I think there are levels. I don't think any of the motivations are necessarily bad. They're like, well, my motivation for training when I was 15 was just purely to look good aesthetically. And
I've never left
although
that.
that's not, and that just stayed with me as like the top priority. No, but it's like that got included into a bigger whole. That's not the main reason I train these days, although it's a really important part of it, obviously. It's like I move and I train now because I enjoy it, and because I enjoy exploring my body, and I enjoy making various shapes, and I enjoy gaining new capabilities and stretching my capacity. And it seems like all of those kind of lower motivations, or those less admirable motivations, are like stepping stones to kind of loftier or more noble drives, if you want to phrase it that way. But so yeah, my why is I enjoy it, and I feel shit when I don't do it. So I just keep on doing it because that seems the thing to do. And included in that are all these kind of more primal motivations around sexuality and status, and these things also exist.
Yeah, I almost feel like those are necessary. We couldn't have anything higher without these baser, fundamental biological drives. Like I like to play a
Yeah,
little
fun's a
thought
good word for
experiment.
it. Yeah.
Like I wonder if, because I always think at the deepest level, it is a sexual value that we're trying to increase through training or through anything we do, money, work,
Mm-hmm.
art, like down below,
Yeah.
like that's gonna get in there. And
That's a
if that were
pretty
removed,
primary driving force, yeah.
like if females or that would not increase our value training at all or money at all, I just imagine we would be bums, like not going after any of these things. So yeah, I think it is like it builds the platform for us to have these higher um, ideals of why we're doing this practice, which is great, you know, which is it's maybe
Yeah.
why it's there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really primary force that I neglect or you push away at your own peril. Like I think if you try pushing it, it's just going to retreat into shadow. So it's not going to go away, but it's just going to kind of hide. It's going to be there judging other people for having, like, wanting to look good. Oh, look at that guy. He just cares about how he looks. Like, in that judgment, there's like most likely a big repressed part that's just crying out to be included, but instead it's just kind of judging and being malevolent from being.
Yeah, the dragon you're feeding in the dark shadows.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to start doing some quick fire questions before I let you go, real quick. Quick fire segment. So Bjarte, I mean, you're talking to you. I mean, you're such a grounded person. It's like a little microdose. It feels like that I'm taking. It's a great experience conversing with you. Have you done any deep psychedelic work? Are you comfortable talking about that?
I didn't hear actually what your question was, but I'm assuming it was like, have I use of plant substances, or was that it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's not something I normally share about, but I've definitely situations that have been facilitated by that have been deep, profound experiences for me. Should I say they've helped me on the way to see where I'm full, basically. But they only seem to do that when I'm in the right setting. So they don't, yeah, they need to be respected in order for that to happen, in my opinion. And I think, or just my feeling about it is that on their own, they're not gonna necessarily lead to sustainable change. They seem to have to be, well, that's my opinion anyway, that they really benefit from being accompanied with a deeper practice that surrounds it and helps facilitate those insights being integrated into your being. So there's like a one-off into the mystical, become like a little, right, oh shit, this is really, there's something here for me to explore. And they can be like a little opener up into a deeper reality and a stronger connection to yourself. But yeah, it's something I've explored in the past and probably will at some point in the future again too. And I notice I feel comfortable talking about it. And I notice I'm afraid of being judged for that also.
Yeah,
It's
that's
still
totally normal. Yeah.
It's still it's still a taboo subject.
Yeah, I've felt that too. But I feel like where I live, I think it's going to be recreational legalized in a couple of years. So I think the tide's shifting as far as that, and it's a great tool.
Yeah, well, actually, where
I'd
I'm
love to
living,
bring
it
you out
already
here.
is.
Oh, is it? Oh, yeah. Well, Amsterdam, right?
So I'm actually lucky in that way that if I want to use it, I can just go to the corner smart shop and I can buy some truffles.
Mm.
So yeah, here in Amsterdam, it's not really that
Yeah, nothing
taboo, I
is, right?
guess. But
You lucky bastard. Yeah,
Yep.
awesome. Well, I'd
Mm.
love to bring you out to Joshua Tree, and we can explore together sometime.
Mm.
Another thing I wanted to
Be
ask you about
fun.
quickly is, yeah, it would be, um, is the concept of chi. So I'm wondering how you view energy and what is it we're moving, and do you, I'm guessing I'm guessing your view of energy and chi, because I know it's a word people throw around, but I'd like to get your take on it.
Mm. Yeah, what is that? I don't I don't really know like what it is. I just haven't experienced it, and I guess it's something that scientifically we don't. There's no evidence directly for it, like whatever it is. To me, I feel it as a life force that's moving in me. And a life force, it's like a life force that's either, I guess, you might interpret it as being the nervous system. Like, it's like how much fluidity in your nervous system and how much power is there, like available for you to radiate and fill yourself with. And like, and how much access do you have to that? And I think that's something Tai Chi cultivates is like access to regular nervous system through softening and releasing it, so that you can choose to engage it, and you can choose to bring it back to a resting state also. So, but Chinese think of qi as like this energy that's in your body, that's like vital energy that's animating you, that you get within yourself. And it also seems this call it yuan qi, which is original, and that you have a limited supply of, that you can kind of squander by
Ejaculating.
indulging. Yeah, that's that's one way you can squander it. Yeah, sure. Or drinking too much, or yeah, excesses in any way.
I mean, I personally feel a loss of vitality if I'm orgasming too frequently. And I want to say there was a Taoist formula, like your age in a certain amount of days, where it gave you like how often you should ejaculate um, to kind of sustain your peak vitality. I forget what it was.
Hmm.
Um, who knows what's going on, but I feel that as an N1 just subjectively. Um, but it's interesting that there's a whole
Yeah,
practice around this.
yeah. I think it's an interesting question, uh, and there are varying opinions on it. Like a lot of like when we're teenagers, we have this insane sex drive, and like it seems to be totally insatiable. And then as we grow older, we kind of get more and more depleted from it. I guess. There are so many different opinions on it, and personally, I guess I definitely feel it if I do it too often, like, and if it's not done in a good way, like, because it can be an act of self-love or love between um, between two people also, of course. But it's like how is it? How do you reach points of orgasm? Seems to be uh, really crucial. And if it happens in kind of a contracted way, where you're just like trying to get it out, which is the case when it's like used as a distraction, you're you're not really mindful of what you're doing. Uh, or if you're watching porn, for example, then that's the way it's expressed is like as a contraction and as like a need to get something out. And the way I see that is like it could be just a squandering of life force.
Yeah. I mean, I view it totally different now in my life. Like, is the cost of the ticket worth the ride? I mean, even like sex with a partner. This sounds bad, but I almost feel like I almost feel a little bit of resentment, like they took some life force from me, like I gave it
Mhm.
away. And I think it's different with like males and females. Females are almost energetically vitalized after sex, where men it's like we died a little bit, you know?
Like
And
for
I feel like there's this shift of energy.
the step of falling
Um,
asleep, so like the man falling asleep afterwards.
yeah. So it's like I
Yeah,
want to keep as
and
much of that as I can.
well, there are a lot of tantric practices that uh, like really practice the cultivation of that and the strictness around nation. Like they take that very seriously, and I think with this, as with everything, like there's a balance possible, and if you really are close to yourself and what you need, you can feel that. But of course, being close to yourself and what you need is probably one of the hardest things to do ever. So that is maybe not
Mm,
advice because it's
yeah.
part of the whole process of maturation. But so in that case, like strict guidelines can be helpful, but they can also be limiting in other ways.
Mm.
So
So,
yeah, I
so
don't fall
Bjarte,
at all. But
well, yeah, it's definitely going to change my masturbation practice. Um,
I'm glad I can
yeah,
be a
but I mean,
close in that way.
you're going to be on my mind next time. Yeah, but it all ties back to energy and you know the
Mm.
experience that you're using the tool for. Um, and one last question: we've talked about you know movement, internal movement, and experience. How do you tie in breath or breath work? Do you have a separate practice for this? Is it um, intertwined with your other practices? How do you approach uh, breath and breathing?
Yeah, breathwork. Well, um, yeah, I don't have like breath work oriented practices. Like it's included in a lot of what I do. The way I deal with the breath is I most often just witness it and make space for the witnessing of it without needing to change it, but more like, oh, what's your breath doing right now? And more often than not, just the observation of it will start to change it. And of course, in Tai Chi, like a belly breathing is preferable, like breathing deeply with the belly. But if you force that also, you can create problems through forcing it. So I guess it's not really my specialty to really work with the body through the breath. I work with the body through sensation, and that's how I access the body. It's like through sensation, and that could be the sensations of the breath also. Like, what are those sensations like? The breath is crazy powerful. Like if you really tune into it, and because it's one of these. Of course, it's one of these mechanisms that can be both rated just automatically and consciously. So it's a powerful connection to regulating your nervous system. And that's one of the only ways we know, or like that science knows, I guess, of how to regulate your nervous system. It's like it's by having a longer exhale than your inhale. By extending the time you exhale, you are lowering your heart rate through the mechanism of the vagal brake, influence that has on your heart. So there's definitely a deep link to the subconscious that comes through the breath. And done quite a bit of that work myself through the Taoist practices, but my real expertise on it, I guess, is quite limited since that's not the focus I have.
Well, I think we're all experts on it since if we didn't do it, we'd die. But yeah, I love that answer. There's actually another Tai Chi practitioner who gave me a similar answer too. It's funny, like breath work, like just be aware of it. It was a silly idea for them to try to like do these certain protocols or tempos. They're like, just watch it, just be aware of it. So
yeah, I guess that's my preference for it. It's just like, well, it's something you can be aware of, and it's something you cannot be aware of. And I know that there are approaches that can really help some people by like really paying close attention to it. But in the end, your breath is just there anyway. You're just doing it, and it's something that can have a profound impact on your mental state, on your emotional states. So it's something that's good to be aware of.
yeah, it's amazing tool, like you mentioned, on the nervous system. I mean, the fact that every inhalation is, a sympathetic stimulation and response, and every exhalation is parasympathetic. Just that wave is, yeah, it's beautiful and amazing, and ties in to life itself, right?
Yeah.
All right, Bjarte. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me, man. I look forward to learning from you when you teach in OMU in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
And yeah, man,
I'm looking forward to that too.
I am excited. Yeah, thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, it's been a fun ride, man.
All right, go.
We covered a lot of grounds.
Go tuck your baby in, and
yeah, I'm gonna go swaddle her up and see if she's ready to sleep soon.
All right. Have a good night, man.
Okay, man. Yeah, you too. Thanks a lot. Bye. Peace out.